Senator Obama, of course, faces the daunting task of beating the GOP in a general election. But how old exactly is the grand old party, the GOP? The history books say the Republican Party was founded in 1854 by disaffected members of the Whig Party. At the Republican convention last week, Governor Mike Huckabee said that Abe Lincoln founded the GOP, except he didn't run for office for another 6 years. And now there's this new entry. On the heels of Sarah Palin's ascension to vice presidential nominee, John McCain's campaign manager, Rick Davis, has told Bloomberg News that the Republican Party is actually only 4 days old. Davis said, quote, "One of the things this Republican convention did is create a whole new Republican Party." Apparently it took a woman to give birth to the new Republican Party. Congratulations. Next up, talking and walking and then feeding yourself. The McCain-Palin campaign wants the country to see them as a new kind of republicanism, as a fresh new start that erases all taint of the Bush-Cheney years, as if they never happened. Keith Olbermann, our colleague here, did have the chance to ask Barack Obama about that tonight.
In your opinion, is Governor Palin experienced enough and qualified enough to become president of the United States in the relatively short-term future?
Well, I'll let you ask Governor Palin that when I'm sure she'll be appearing on your show.
Sure.
but rather than focus on her resume, I just want to focus on where she wants to take the country. As far as I can tell, there has not been any area, economic policy or foreign policy, in which she is different from John McCain or George Bush. In many ways, in fact, she agrees with George Bush even more than John McCain. So if John McCain agrees with Bush 90% of the time, maybe with her it's 97%.
That brings us to our next guest, Steve Benen, who writes for Washington Monthly. Hi, Steve. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Rachel. It's great to be here.
On the campaign trail today, Joe Biden said he can't find anything to indicate that McCain disagrees with this administration on a single, solitary, significant policy initiative. So we thought we'd throw it out to you. Can you think of one?
No, I've been trying. I've been trying to find an area where there's some area of disagreement between the Bush administration, the Bush White House, and the McCain campaign. I can't find any, and it's odd given that right now, especially in the convention and the couple of days since, we've heard this unusual line from the McCain campaign that somehow they're the new ticket of change. I don't see it. In fact, if you scratch the surface and look for any explanation for how they're the party of change, there's just nothing there. It reminds me a lot of the list of Bush's economic success stories. There's just not much there.
Steve, on the idea that this is a brand new Republican Party, a Republican Party that indicates a lot of change from the old Republican Party of 5 days ago, I feel like I'm seeing parallels to the so-called compassionate conservative argument from George W. Bush running for president for the first time in 2000. Do you see parallels there? Is there something about the rebranding of the traditional Republican policies that might work here the way it worked for Bush in 2000?
Well, it's a stretch. 8 years ago, Bush was a different kind of Republican. That was a line that Karl Rove had crafted and he was very proud of. And then even if we go back to 1988, George H.W. Bush talked about a kindler, gentler party as well as a kindler, gentler nation. It seems as if we're just repackaging the same frames over and over again. If there's a hunger for change in this country, and I think most of the polls show that there is, it's a pretty tough sell, especially if you actually look for the substance. You look for areas of disagreement in terms of economic policy, foreign policy. There's just no real difference. And so given that, it's very tough to make the case that they're going to be a ticket or party of change, or for that matter, a new kind of party, given that there's no real difference.
Steve, in terms of Sarah Palin and her, I guess, entree into the campaign at this point as the most unknown of all four people who are at the top of these two tickets for the major parties, there seems to be some evidence that in terms of what leadership style Sarah Palin has demonstrated in her previous jobs, in her work as governor of Alaska, even her work as mayor of Wasilla, Alaska, there seems to be some stylistic similarities, some maybe even temperamental similarities between her and George W. Bush. Have you looked into that at all?
Absolutely. There was a terrific article in the Los Angeles Times just this morning when they kind of went into some of the details on how Palin governs as a chief executive. As a rule, we've heard from members of both parties in the legislature saying that Palin's style is not one where she likes to really roll up her sleeves and get down to the unglamorous work of governing. She just kind of likes to paint with a broad brush and wait for other people to fill in the details. This sounds kind of familiar. It's a lot like the Bush White House. In addition to that, I'd add that one of the things we found is that she doesn't have a real tolerance for dissent. If there are people who disagree with her or confront her or challenge her in a way that make her feel as if she's wrong, she shuns them and in some instances even punishes them. And again, this sounds a lot like the Bush White House. And so when we deal with the substance, the agendas are almost identical. But then when we look at the style, it seems like there's, if anybody's the ideological heir or the stylistic heir to George W. Bush, it's Sarah Palin.
Steve, one last question for you. It's one thing to talk about how the campaign is representing itself, what they're trying to do, but there's another question about how it's going to be received. Is it possible that the country, the electorate, will have seen the conservative, compassionate conservative line, will have seen people try to run as a rebranded new type of Republican before, and that they'll just be too smart for this type of politics this time around?
Well, that's one of the lines that Barack Obama has been emphasizing a lot. I heard him mention it today in Flint, Michigan. I've heard him mention it over the weekend. And he kept on saying, Americans are not stupid. And I think that's a very subtle way of, or not so subtle way of him saying that the McCain campaign is trying to fool voters. They're trying to pull the wool over your eyes, trying to suggest that they're different, trying to suggest that there's going to be a ticket of change. It's a tough sell. I think that one of the things Rick Davis said last week is that this election is not about the issues. If Rick Davis is right and he's able to successfully sell that this isn't about issues, then I think the McCain campaign has a real shot. But if Obama can focus things back onto the issues and notice and emphasize how there's no real difference, I think that the Obama campaign is probably pretty well positioned for November.
Steve Benen from the Washington Monthly, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Congratulations on the new show.
Thanks a lot, Steve.